For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christine Siegel. I'm the provost here at Fairfield University. And on behalf of the president and the administration at Fairfield, I am really pleased to welcome all of you here today. In what I hope and what promises to be the first of a series of conversations about diversity hosted by the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions, headed up by our Associate Dean, Stephanie Storms, and Chair of our Educational Studies and Teacher Preparation Department, Pierre Orlis. I am really thrilled to launch this. In addition to being provost, I'm a professor in the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions, so my academic and faculty home is with this school, and it's really important to me. At Fairfield, we really continue to always say, what is our purpose? What is it that we're trying to do as a university? Certainly, in our Jesuit tradition, we're engaged in the formation of men and women for others, to educate people to be in service to others in the world. And that happens everywhere, but most especially in our Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions. As a Catholic institution, we're also responsible for carrying on what is called the Catholic intellectual tradition, and some have named a 2,000-year-old conversation between the church and the world. And the way that we do that at Catholic universities is that we engage in dialogue and conversation around the critical questions of our time. And I think there's no more critical question of our time right now than that of inclusive excellence and diversity. And so I am thrilled to be here to launch this series and to welcome you. In a few minutes, we'll get a formal introduction of our speaker, Dr. Sonia Nieto, but I also personally want to welcome her. I just had the opportunity to meet her in person for the first time a few minutes ago, but truthfully, this is the first time she's here with me in person, but I feel that Sonia's been here with me for years because, as I told her, I've been teaching when I taught in the Graduate School in Education and Allied Profession, her many books, including this one, Light in Her Eyes, so that she's been with me in the classroom many times. And while I could have brought the copy of her new book for her to sign for me, I thought it was most appropriate to bring my old one that's highlighted and dog-eared and from when I taught, that she has just signed for me. So no one is more thrilled than I to welcome her and to have her here in person after she's been here with us in her scholarship, not just me, but I know many of us who teach her books. So we are thrilled to have you here. To begin our round of formal introductions, I'd like to introduce to you the Dean of the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions, Bob Hanifin. Bob joined us as Dean 4 years ago and really came to Fairfield with a mission of his own, and that was to provide quality teacher preparation and education that would have an impact on the world. Bob is deeply committed to education that can be transformative, particularly for the lives of students in underserved districts. He does that through advancing our partnerships with the Bridgeport Public Schools, with the Catholic Diocese in Fairfield, with schools in Norwalk and Stamford, as he advances our many programs, and he's been tireless in this effort. Bob is also a leader among the deans of education in Connecticut. He advocates for the best of teacher preparation in Hartford at the state level. He's an active member and leader of the Jesuit deans of education across the country, and Deans for Justice, I forget the name of that group. So this is really important to him. As Bob knows, the best way to improve the lives of those children in underserved school districts and communities is to ensure that they have the best of those teaching them, and that those teachers are best prepared. As Sonia teaches us, though, the best way that those teachers can serve those students is to allow them to bring their voices and their conversation into the classroom, to respect the history and the stories that they bring in ways that can be transformative. And thus, this teaching and learning experience becomes a dialogue of education between the students, their stories and their culture that they bring to the classroom, and the teachers who are prepared to meet them and bring those stories into the full learning experience. So I am, just as I said, really thrilled to bring this conversation together tonight and to introduce to you Dean Hanifin.
Thank you, Christine. Another good way to improve the outcomes of kids in inner city impoverished areas is to have equitable funding formulas that would give them a fair chance, a fighting chance. So that's something we'll continue to work towards in Connecticut. I am here. Again, I add my welcomes to Christine's to you, and thank you for coming. And I also thank Sonia for traveling down to spend some time with us. I'm here to introduce the introducer, so I will be brief. And Pierre gave me a nice write-up about himself that I'm not going to read. I'm just going to say, I'll read some of it, but I would like to just say Pierre has been a very welcome addition to our faculty. He's only here a year. He brings years of experience from New Mexico State and as a classroom teacher. The most important thing you can say about Pierre is he's the proud father of Asha and husband to Romina. So we are very proud and happy to have Pierre here with us, and I'm delighted to introduce him. I will name 2 forthcoming books of his many. He's a well-published author, but he's got 2 coming out. I want to read those because they're going to be hot on the shelf soon. One is called Accent Matters, The Price of Speaking in Different Accented Englishes, Decolonizing, and the other one is Decolonizing Higher Education, Subaltern Professors Speak Out. So without any further ado, I encourage Pierre Orelus to come to the Orelus.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you did not read what I wrote. That would have been so boring. Good evening. I want to thank all of you for being here. Oh, sorry. Before I introduce Sonia, I thought I would begin with a story because I believe story matters. I can obviously say hundreds of things about Sonia, but I'm going to begin with a story that really has defined my relationship with Sonia as a student, now as one of his mentees. About 16 years ago, while I was finishing my master's, a master's degree, because I got 2 masters at UMass Boston, I was introduced to Sonia Nieto's work, particularly her first book, Affirming Diversity. One of my former professors, Donaldo Macedo, strongly encouraged me to read that book, and I read it, and I fell in love with it. Instantly, I wanted to know who that person was. At the time, I didn't know that she was that famous. I just wanted to meet her. But most importantly, I wanted to study with her. So I decided to write her an email, and she quickly responded, and to meet with her to see how that would turn out. And she was very patient. I remember when I was on my way to UMass Amherst, I got lost many times. She patiently waited for me. And when I got there, I thought she was going to be pissed because I was 1 hour late. An hour late, imagine that. I came in, she was very calm, as always. And she said to me, "It's an honor to meet you." I said, "It's an honor to meet me." "No, it's an honor to meet you." And that's how the whole conversation started. She told me about the program. She strongly encouraged me to apply, which I did. I got admitted. I got there. Guess what? She was on sabbatical. And when I came back, she said to me, "I'm retiring." I said, thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much. Thank you. But it wasn't too bad because I got to study with her. In fact, it was better because I got undivided attention working on one-on-one. I did an independent, was it 1 or 2? 2 independent studies with her. I got to know her both as a scholar, but most importantly, as a person. Sonia is someone who's very, very, very kind. She believes in mentoring people so that they can become agents of social change. And I believe I have become one. I hope that I have become one of them. And it's really more than an honor to introduce to you Professor Nieto. Professor Nieto is Professor Emerita of Language, Culture, and Teaching in the College of Education, University of Massachusetts Amherst. She has devoted her professional life to questions of diversity, equity, and social justice and education. Her teaching has spanned early elementary through graduate education, and her research has focused on multicultural education, teacher education, and the education of students of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. The author of 11 books and dozens of book chapters and journal articles. She also wrote a memoir called Brooklyn Dreams, My Life in Public Education, which I haven't read yet. But she told me a bit about it this morning. No, this afternoon while we were having lunch. So I'm still gonna read it though. Her classic text, Affirming Diversity, which I fall in love with, is now in its 7th edition. The 5th throughout 7 editions were co-authored by her friend and colleague, Patty Bodie. The first edition, 1992, was selected for the Museum of Education Readers Guide as one of the 100 books that helped define the field of education in the 20th century. Professor Nieto has received numerous awards for scholarly work, activism, and advocacy, including 8 honorary doctorates. I just found out that she's going to receive another one, but I cannot mention where and when. She received the 1988 Educator of the Year Award from the National Association for Multicultural Education, the 2017 James Squire Award, and the 2005 Outstanding Educator in the Language Arts Award, both from the National Council of Teachers of English and the Distinguished Service Medal from Teachers College, Columbia University, the highest award granted by that institution, among many others. A member of the National Academy of Education, she's also a fellow of the American Educational Research Association and a laureate of Kappa Del Papi. She's currently working on a book about teaching with her daughter, Alicia Lopez, also a teacher. Please help me welcome my friend, Sonia Nieto.
Thank you, Pierre. Merci. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? He has a stronger voice than I do. Is this all right? Yeah, good. So, just a little correction. I told all my students I was retiring. You probably don't remember. You didn't want to know. But anyway, I am very happy to be here, to be with Pierre again, and to talk with you about important issues in education. So my topic today is culturally responsive pedagogy, what educators need to know, and I want to focus on both K-12 educators, or pre-K-12 educators, and on teacher educators, because we all need to learn, and we need to keep learning. So what do teachers need to know? And I will try to, I don't have that much time, but I will try to get at most of these things. Teachers need to learn about and challenge deficit discourses, and I'll say more about each of these. They need to know that race and ethnicity matter in learning. They need to learn about culture, what it is, and what it isn't. They need to become sociocultural mediators, to understand the role of power and justice, which have been alluded to already, I'm glad to say, in these introductions. Teachers also need to learn about themselves. That sounds, sort of like, of course, but not everybody does. And to bring themselves into the classroom. They also need to learn about their students, because there are no generic students. They need to learn about the community in which they teach or in which their students are going to teach. They need to create affirming curriculum and pedagogy, and they need to learn both self-confidence and humility. An important but elusive combination. So this is from a piece that I wrote with Willis Hawley in, where is it from? I forget where it's from, but it's from Educational Leadership. And so we wrote this piece about how race and ethnicity do matter in education, because education isn't colorblind, it isn't gender blind, it isn't language blind, ability blind, or social class blind, or any of those other things, of those other differences that we sort of want to not take into account, as if all students were generic students. So what we wrote was that one could expect policies and practices related to students' race and ethnicity to be high on the reform agenda. Of course, there is widespread discussion of the so-called minority achievement gap. But ironically, solutions on the public agenda are invariably colorblind. So race and ethnicity do matter, and that's why teachers need to learn about race and ethnicity and to take it into account in their teaching, in their curriculum. But that's been hard to do for a lot of reasons. We have this long legacy of blaming the victim. If you have not read this book, Blaming the Victim by William Ryan, I certainly encourage you to do so. I see people with gray hair are nodding because they have read the book. Others may not have. It's from 1972, and it's a fabulous book. One of the things that William Ryan wrote about is this long legacy. He said, "We are dealing, it would seem, not so much with culturally deprived children as with culturally deprived schools. And the task to be accomplished is not to revise, amend, and repair deficient children, but to alter and transform the atmosphere and operations to which we commit these children." A beautiful, beautiful explanation of blaming the victim and of why we should get rid of that. So, and yet we do have this long legacy of blaming the victim. So we talk about kids in terms of deficit. So I think teachers need to begin by challenging these deficit discourses, because no language is inferior, no culture is a so-called culture of poverty, no child should be invisible, and no community can be insignificant. They all matter. So what are these deficit discourses? There's a lot of them, and these are just a few that I put up here, that if they come to school not speaking English, they'll never catch up. I caught up. I went to school at the age of 6 with not a word of English. And I'm so glad, because I learned it pretty quickly and I maintained my Spanish. Very important. Now, just throw a little something in here about being culturally relevant. I have some examples later, but if you are a classroom teacher, please never encourage your students to speak English at home. Please. And if you meet with the parents, ask the parents to speak their native language at home. That way the kids will have at least 2 languages. Another, that being bilingual is a handicap. Only in the United States can we say that. Because being bilingual is an asset. How could it be otherwise? And yet if you mention that you speak another language, especially if you speak it with an accent, it's seen as a deficit. If, however, you are a native English speaker and you learn another language, that's seen as a wonderful thing, right? Then it's an asset. So I think we really need to challenge these deficit discourses, that being raised by a single parent is a handicap. Look, one thing I think I have to say is that poverty is a handicap. And I think we can all appreciate that. But that doesn't mean that you can't get ahead. We have to fight poverty, not children who live in poverty, right? That children of backgrounds other than white middle class are culturally deprived. No child is culturally deprived. All children, all people have assets. They have talents and skills and strengths that we need to become aware of, etc. So what is culture? I just want to take a few minutes to do this. Culture, it's a process. It's not a product, and we often think of it as a product, as what you eat, but instead it's about practices, not rigid traits. You know, that if you are African American, you're this way, and only that way. And that can never be true. And I cite this article that's a wonderful piece by Chris Gutierrez and Barbara Rogoff. It's from 2003, Educational Research, and I really recommend it for those who teach anthropology in education and anything having to do with culture. Culture is dynamic. It's always changing. So what I am as a Puerto Rican is different from what my sister is or what my children are. You know, it's always changing. It's multifaceted. It's not just about one thing. It is created. We create culture. We're not born with it. It's socially constructed. We make it up as we go along. It's learned. Right? So it's not inherent. I think Obama spoke once about how he was raised by a white mother and white grandparents, so he didn't get the dance gene. And of course, there is no dance gene. It's social. It's socially constructed, it's learned, and it's created. So what it's not ethnic tidbits in the curriculum, it's not celebrating diversity, it's not a holidays and heroes approach, it's not just about multicultural dinners. Now, there's nothing wrong with multicultural dinners, but if that's the only thing you do about diversity, don't. It has to be more than that. It's not a definitive and rigid set of values, discourses, and practices. You know, I used to joke saying, what kind of Puerto Rican am I? I don't like short grain rice, and that's, that's the only rice that Puerto Ricans eat. Well, I like long grain rice, I'm sorry. And so nobody should have to apologize for anything like that, because it is not a rigid set. What it is, it's values, traditions, discourses, practices. It's social and political relationships. It's a particular worldview, but not everybody ascribes to that worldview, because it's always dynamic. It's a shared history, geographic location, race, ethnicity, social class, social identity, and religion. All of those are also part of culture. And so this is a working definition that I have in Affirming Diversity. But basically, culture is how we live in the world. If we want a very brief, succinct definition, it's how we live in the world. However, in some discussions of culture in education, we forget to talk about power and about justice. And so I want people to keep in mind certain questions, because it's not just about, as I said, ethnic tidbits and celebrating certain holidays. Power. We have to ask questions such as, who has it? In the school setting we're talking about, or in education, public education, or any kind of education. How is it used? Who determines the curriculum? Who defines the pedagogy? Who sets the testing policy? What about the disciplinary policies? You know, these zero tolerance policies that went on for so long? Somebody had to come up with them. Was it the people involved? Probably not, most of the time. What's the nature of outreach to parents and families? And what about justice? How does the school respond to racism and other injustices? Unfortunately, I have a very close-up, anecdote from just very recently with one of my grandkids who are identifiably kids of color. And so one of my little grandchildren called my daughter from school and saying, they're making fun of me. They're making fun of my hair. And this is what kids go through all the time. I have another granddaughter who wanted to be Rapunzel. So I got her 3 books on black hair. One was about a Rapunzel with black hair, which was great. I mean, on people who have black hair. I think that's understandable, right? What about teachers? How do they respond to acts of racism and other injustices? And how do school policies and practices privilege some students over others? So we need to look at the curriculum. Who's included and who's excluded, and why is that? And what can we do about it? Who's missing? And why is that? I can tell you that as a kid, I never even heard the word Puerto Rican until I was a master's student, actually. Because I never read anything or saw anything that was about me and my people. That has changed, but we have a long way to go still. So learning about yourself, what does that mean? Reflect on your own values and perspectives and biases. I encourage people to keep a journal, especially teachers, but also teacher educators. So this is for both. Keep a journal. Join or create a reading or writing or inquiry group to study together. Explore your own heritage, because too many times it's the case that white teachers or white pre-service teachers or white teacher educators say, well, I don't really have a culture. Yeah, they have a culture. Everybody has a culture. And so learn about it. Read about your people's history. Explore your privilege. Read Christine Sleeter's White Bread. I don't know if that's something that you use here, but it's a terrific teaching tool, weaving cultural past into the present about, it's a novel, and it's about how this particular teacher learned about her own heritage and her privilege because of that heritage. Do your own critical family history. So Christine has written a lot about this. Learn about your students, because as I said, there are no generic students. All students of similar backgrounds are not the same. In fact, there are as many differences among them as there are between them and any other kinds of kids. Create curriculum to find out about your students. And how do you do that? Well, I'll share one thing that my daughter does at the beginning of every semester. She writes a letter to her new students, telling them all about her. And so she does something that used to be sort of forbidden, that you don't talk about your personal life. The letter is all about her personal life, who she is, how she grew up with 2 languages, how important that was and is to her, how she's raised her kids with 2 languages, she and her husband, and so on. And how she became a teacher, why she loves being a teacher. And then after each section, she would write a question for her students to think about. What language do you speak at home? What do they call you? Do you have a nickname? And so on. And their first assignment is to write her a letter. And then she learns about them and is able to go back and use those things in her curriculum. So develop curriculum to build on their interests, skills, talents, and needs. So teacher educators also need to learn about your students, because most teacher educators, like most teachers, are middle-class, white, monolingual English speakers. And so they need to put themselves in the positions of the pre-service or in-service teachers who they're teaching. Many have had few experiences and have limited expertise in issues of equity and diversity if they haven't studied them or they haven't lived those things. So that means studying and becoming students again, even though they're teacher educators. Start where your students are, which means don't be judgmental about their own deficit-laden comments and attitudes. You know, we've all had students who we think say the wrong things, who say racist things. Try to use that as a learning experience. But confront negative, stereotypical, racist, and other oppressive comments and attitudes. Don't let them just lie there. Confront them directly and with empathy. Don't shield students from discomfort. I've always said it's not our role to make students comfortable, you know, because the bottom line, as in all educational endeavors, is to begin with respect for students. And this is about generic students. Teachers must actively learn about their particular students in order to design instruction that will meet their needs, whether students are kindergarten students or postdoctoral students. Become social mediators. What does that mean? Well, all education is about taking students where they are and taking them someplace else. That's what education is all about. Social mediators go a step further because they have their students carry who they are along with them, instead of asking or demanding that they leave who they are behind them, which is what happens to so many kids of diverse backgrounds. Oh yeah, well, it's great that you speak Spanish, but forget about that here. You can't do that here, as I was told in my, you know, when I was a kid. Oh, we don't speak Spanish here, it's rude. You know, instead of saying, wow, you're really lucky, can you teach us some words? So I want to end with some basic concrete examples of culturally responsive and culturally sustaining pedagogy, which is a newer term that I hope you all learn about. Learn to say students' names correctly. It sounds so minor, and yet our name is the most important thing we have. You know, I would start my classes, I don't know if Pierre remembers this, but by having students talk about their name. Who named you? Where did it come from? What does it mean? That class would go on for hours because we really got into the meat of identity, of oppression, of colonialism, of racism, of sexism, of classism. And I didn't mention any of those things when I introduced the topic. It was just about introducing who they are. But if you don't learn to say students' names correctly, you are disrespecting students. So it might take a little longer. Learn your Asian students' names. Okay, we're not used to them? Well, we're teachers, right? We have to learn. Don't make Jose Joey, unless that's what he wants. But he may want that because he already has picked up the message that it's cooler to be Joey than to be Jose. So make it enticing for him to be Jose. Label the room with languages spoken by the students. There is nothing like that. Even with high school students, put words up that they will recognize and they will immediately connect with that. Have books and other materials that reflect the backgrounds of students in the room and of people in the world. Because the students in the room may not be very diverse, but the world is incredibly diverse, and they will be out in that world. Learn as much as you can about your students. You know, the way that I describe it is to be a student of your students. Learn as much as you can. And that's not, you know, the stereotypical things that I was saying before about, you know, all Vietnamese are this way, all African Americans are this way, but rather learn some of their history. I was just mentioning before to the dean that, you know, Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico and here, and no matter where we are always U.S. citizens. But so many people don't know that. It's more important for you to know that and a little bit of the history of Puerto Rico than about, you know, how we have compadres and padrinos. That's all interesting and great, but knowing the history will teach you a lot more. Engage in authentic family outreach, respectful, authentic family outreach. learn about and become engaged in the community, because there are too many teachers who leave the school every day and never bother to walk around the neighborhood or get to know the people in that neighborhood. So I've been saying for years now that one of the best professional development activities in a school is to take people, the teachers, for a walk in the neighborhood. That alone would open their eyes to a lot of the assets, because every community has them. Learn another language. I was telling Pierre before that my daughter is learning Portuguese now. She's fluent in Spanish, English, and French, and now she's learning Portuguese because she has Cape Verdean students and she wants to eventually learn some Creole. That makes a huge difference when you're connecting with families, a huge difference. So what are the implications? It's about mindset, curriculum, pedagogy. First, learn what you want your pre-service and practicing students to learn about themselves, their students, and students' communities. Why? And this comes from Simona Golden, who's at the University of Michigan, where I spoke a few months ago, and she wrote this, and it just really, really resonated with me. To ensure that they are, oops, little typo, that they're equipped not only to enact equitable practice, but also to disrupt patterns of inequity in their classrooms. So this is from the cover of the second edition of the book that Christine, the provost, was talking about. These are some of my grandchildren. And so this is what I live with. This is what I believe in. And I think all teachers need to look around, look at who they are responsible for, and start teaching as if their lives depended on it. Because they do. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm back again. So this time I would not be sweating like I was earlier. I just have the bad tendency to get really sweaty when I'm speaking. But anyway, it's a great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague, Dr. Stephanie Stroms. She's an associate dean in the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions, an assistant professor of educational studies and teacher prep here at Fairfield University. Her interests include social justice education, teacher action research, and faculty development. Her forthcoming books focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion in the college classroom. Stephanie is a member of the Connecticut State Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights and on the board of the National Association for Multicultural Education. Please help me welcome Dr. Stroms.
Thank you, everyone. What I'd like to do is we're going to invite our panelists up to sit and join Dr. Nieto. But we're going to take like a little 5-minute break, because here at a Jesuit institution, we know how important it is for reflection. And so, so we're going to give you about 5 minutes to reflect on what on Dr. Nieto's presentation. We're going to give our panelists some time to reflect, because when we come back, I will introduce the panelists, and then they will give a response. And then we're going to open it up for questions. So think about what you want to ask. Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. I was enjoying the conversations I was hearing going on out there, and that was wonderful. So what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. I'm going to start from the farthest right. And each panelist will give a 1 to 2 minute response to Dr. Nieto's presentation. And then there will be 2 of us with a mic coming around. And if you have questions, and we hope you have lots of questions, raise your hand and we'll come out, or stand up and we'll bring the mic to you afterwards, okay? And I'm gonna be walking a little slow because I chose to wear my heels today. So just give me, I had to wear my heels, so give me some time, okay? All right. To my furthest right, I'd like to introduce Mr. William King. And I just have to say, William took my multicultural education class, and we just had a great semester. Don't you think?
You did.
Okay. No pressure there, right? Okay. No pressure there at all. So, Mr. William King completed his graduate studies at Fairfield University, where he received his Master of Arts in Teaching English to speakers of other languages. He is currently employed as an ESOL teacher at Bassick High School in Bridgeport. William invests his time speaking and working with Bridgeport's families outside of his teaching schedule. He encourages students to make positive changes in every aspect of their lives. William has found inspiration in his position as program coordinator for the Hope Club, a weekly after-school program which affords high school English learners or emergent bilinguals, Sonia taught me that, for one of her books, with the opportunity to mentor elementary school students. He looks forward to expanding this program to other students in Bridgeport. Let's welcome William. Next to William is Dr. Antonio Simoes. Professor Simoes presently holds the title of Dean Emeritus and Adjunct Professor at Fairfield University. He joined Fairfield as the Dean of the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions in 1991. He has over 37 professional publications, 3 books, and has participated in over 100 educational conferences. His latest work is entitled A Theoretical Analysis of the Latest Research of Language Acquisition and the Implications for Language Learning in 2015. In addition, he was a Fulbright Scholar, a board member for the National Association for Bilingual Education, and a column writer for the Luso Americano newspaper. Let's welcome Dr. Simoes. Next to Dr. Simoes is Dr. Stephanie Morrison. Dr. Morrison is an assistant professor of counselor education in the Graduate School of Education and Allied Professions at Fairfield University. She has been a counselor educator for 5 years. Prior to her work in higher education, she was a school counselor. Currently at Fairfield, she is continuing her work focusing on the social justice ethical obligation of counselors, and specifically school counselors, to work with immigrant families and children. She has published a number of articles and book chapters on this topic and has presented at various state, regional, and national conferences. In spring 2017, her article on how school counselors can work with undocumented children was recognized by the Connecticut Governor's Office as best practice for schools districts in Connecticut. So please read that article. All right, to her left is Mr. Hector Sanchez. Mr. Sanchez began his teaching career as a bilingual 6th grade teacher in New York City in 1973. He moved to Puerto Rico in 1979 and became a teacher and later principal of Baldwin School of Puerto Rico. In 1994, Hector moved to Connecticut and became a bilingual 6th grade teacher for 2 years, then a bilingual curriculum specialist for 1 year. In 1997, he became assistant principal at Blackham School in Bridgeport. In 1999, Hector became the head principal at Multicultural Magnet School, also in Bridgeport. In 2004, he became head principal of Harding High School, and in 2007, he became the head principal of Cesar Battaglia School, where he currently serves. Thank you. So we have a wonderful and very established panelists here, so please, we're going to start asking questions now. But first, we'll start with the responses. Mr. King, would you like to start us off?
I have a very deep question.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Oh,
Is that
go
all
ahead.
right? Okay. So, Dr. Nieto mentioned that teachers have to be aware of deficit discourses, social cultural mediators, power and justice, self and students, community, curriculum, pedagogy, self-confidence, and humility. And all of these tenets produces a multiplier effect, which me as the teacher adopts and then goes into the classroom and preaches. But with young children or high school children, there's always this question of, Mr. King, which one comes first? An emphasis easily can be placed on order, therefore centralizing and ultimately breeding ignorance. That's how we get teachers who leave the profession, because they have too much focus on, let's say, cultural competency and not enough an awareness of power and justice. So when I go back to my classroom and I teach my students from these different tenets, which one do I start with first?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, Jesus said, I don't generally quote scripture at all, but the greatest of these is love. Well, I would say the greatest of those is humility. I really believe that. That, you know, if you have humility, you can conquer the world. I mean, it sounds sort of, you know, like it doesn't make sense, but it really does. Because if there are too many people who think they know so much that they have nothing to learn. And if you are, you know, Pierre and I were talking about one of our idols, Paulo Freire, who I actually got to meet and work with when he was alive, and it was just, you know, the most wonderful thing. We were talking about how Paulo was world-renowned and one of the most humble people I have ever met. You know, he just did not let it get to his head. And so I think that that's the greatest thing, because it's about an openness to learn, to be generous with everyone. If you're generous with everyone, then all those other things fall into place. But you can't be generous unless you're humble.
All right. Dr. Simoes?
First of all, what a wonderful presentation.
Yes.
When I was hearing Dr. Nieto speak, I was really reflecting on my own past. I taught the first multicultural course as a graduate student at Columbia University 49 years ago, believe it or not. And I was wondering, they kept going back and forth. Again, at Boston University, we implemented the Lau versus Nichols, and I'll explain that in a minute. And all the question is, where are we today in 2018 in terms of education, in terms of our children, in terms of what's happening in our society? Just a quick statement. I won't read. I'll just talk about it. There was a Lau versus Nichols decision back in 1974, and that decision was to say that equal access to all children in class. And equal access is so important. In other words, I don't care if you want to be a hairdresser, a mechanic, Fairfield University, Harvard, Yale, go for it. Equal access is for the children. As we went through the field in bilingual ed, the research started coming out and started showing us that using the native language, that goes in terms of cultural sensitivity, using the native language as the medium of instruction while learning English as a subject area, the success of school would be tremendously increased. Many studies in California, for example, children who were opted out of bilingual ed and children who remain in bilingual ed were more successful. As the years have gone by, and my reflection on this is that we have gone to other issues were very important. I mean, I call them, you know, issues of the soul, absolutely. But we forgot about the language learner. The language learner now, we just look at it the culturally sensitive, which is very important, but we forget that the research says, and it's almost, I won't say proven, but almost there, that when a child learns in a native language, it usually takes 8 to 10 years to go into a second language in terms of language ability. I mean, it's academic ability. It takes only 1 to 2 years to do a personal ability, which they call BICS. Again, I won't get technical. So a child as we're teachers, are in our classroom, and he or she, let's say Antonio Simoes comes from Portugal, and I start speaking English at the age, and I'm here 1 year. Oh, he speaks English, put him in the mainstream. Okay. That child's almost I won't say doomed to failure, but in terms of all the kinds of things Dr. Nieto talk about, culturally sensitive, knowing the language, knowing the history of the child and so forth. The Connecticut law right now is 30 years, 30 months in terms of going into the English classroom. That is disastrous. It suggests that, in other words, again, I'll stop here because I'd like Dr. Nieto to respond to this. The bottom line is that I'm really convinced, with all the research that is out there, that the way our school systems are created for the language learner is now it's called, by the way, the English learner. Used to be LISA, limited English speaking ability, then LEP, English proficient, then English ELL, English language learner. Now it's EL, English learner. I mean, everything is, you can even see pedagogically how we're moving toward just English only.
Yeah.
So please, again, I'm rambling now, but Dr. Nieto, please, to see,
So-
I'd like to have your
Yeah,
feelings
so
on
as,
that.
as Stephanie mentioned, I like to use the term emergent bilinguals. That's a
Mhm.
term that was coined by Ofelia Garcia of CUNY, the graduate school in New York, because it recognizes that students are on a continuum. They're not just in school to learn English, right? And that's what it sounds like when we call them all these other things, but they are emergent bilinguals because they are using their native language and what other resources they have to make sense of everything. So they eventually will become bilingual, trilingual, who knows? So yeah, I couldn't agree more. But I do want to say something about your term about cultural sensitivity. It's not a term I ever use.
I use it, but I don't like
Yeah.
it either.
Well,
Yeah.
years ago,
Mhm.
actually, I think it was in Connecticut, I came to a conference, and somebody said, so how do we use cultural sensitivity? I said, I don't like that term. Rather than cultural sensitivity, I like to use arrogance reduction.
Cultural knowledge. I believe in cultural knowledge, yes, yeah. I
Yeah,
agree.
cultural knowledge is
Totally.
good, but,
Yeah.
this goes back to humility.
Mhm.
Arrogance, don't be sensitive to me. Give me access, give me resources, Sensitivity is not a bad thing. It's just that it often comes in a very patronizing way. But yeah, I couldn't agree more about the dilemma of kids who are labeled bilingual, who are really emergent bilinguals, and are not really given a chance to develop their bilingualism because they're taken out of bilingual programs before they've really, and I'm sure some of you can talk to that. But I was a teacher in the first bilingual school in the Northeast, PS 25 in the Bronx, 1968. It's the second bilingual school in the country. The first one was in Miami-Dade for the Cuban refugees. And a few months ago, I went to visit. They had invited me because they're doing can it be? Yes, a 50-year. I started there 50 years ago. They are doing a 50-year, sort of anniversary thing. And it was lovely, and I had a great time, and I met some teachers, the principal, who's very dynamic, and so on. It is no longer a bilingual school.
No longer, yeah.
They have some bilingual classes, but we were a totally bilingual school. The times were different, the demands were different, and, I do wish that it would still be a bilingual school, but it's not. And I think that, everything is now being labeled more and more with English. So English is important, it's necessary, but it's not the only game in town.
Yes.
Mhm.
May I just
Thank
2
you.
sec- Absolutely. I would say between 70, so it was around 70, the Title VII amendment in 1975 to 1980, the country was flourishing.
Yes.
We had national networks, we had material centers. For example, let's say a student from Puerto Rico would go to the material center, for example, would create materials for the class. So it was just an exciting time. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was, I'll be quiet after this, Ronald Reagan was elected, there was a block grants, and many programs were decimated, specifically the Black Studies program. All disappeared because there were no federal funds. So, yeah, there's been a push, I guess, to English only again.
But the resistance is starting
The
again.
resistance too, that's right.
The resistance is starting again, and we should not lose sight of that. You know, just look at the
Yeah.
marches, the many marches that there
Right.
were. And hopefully the kids will wake up the adults.
Yes. Thank you. All right, Dr. Stephanie Morrison.
Okay, so Dr. Nieto's presentation spoke deeply to my core values. And since I'm a school counselor, I will pull the school counselors into this conversation because school counselors are critical in partnership within the school system. School counselors are trained to be system change agents and advocates. Unfortunately, the research has shown that school counselors are usually not very effective in working with some of these issues that we're talking about here tonight. And so, as I heard our guest presenter talked about the number of issues, I am particularly focusing on self-awareness because I believe self-awareness is critical to the work that we do, teachers, school counselors, and other support staff in the schools, that if we're not self-aware, if we don't know who we are and what we're about, if we're not open to challenging the biases and the prejudices and discriminations that we have in ourselves, and we do have that, because when I say that, people look at me, yes, we do have biases, prejudices, and discriminations. And so the challenge is to identify these prejudices, and the challenge is to take on cultural humility, I call it. And if we're open, culturally open, and we're humble enough, then we can see how what we bring to the table can impact how we work with our students of a different culture in the school system. And in doing that, you know, sometimes we think of, okay, and I've heard this before because I teach a course called multicultural counseling. A lot of times there's this struggle about, okay, this is very uncomfortable and this is hard for me to do. It is really hard to sit with the things that come out of us. And I call these things the ugliness because sometimes we don't know that we have that inside of us until we sit with that and explore that a little bit. But it's easy to push away from that and uncomfortableness and go to, okay, tell me what I need to do. But we can't just jump to what I need to do. If you don't understand why we need equitable access, then there's no way that we can provide these for our children. And if we don't understand why, it's not just equality is there, but not everybody has equal access, then we can't be system change agents because we're not able to identify the injustices in the policies that are in the school system. And so, you know, and again, if we're not able to do that, then we can't partner with the people that are in the school system, the teachers, the principals, and in the school district, etc. And of course, we can never partner with the parents and the community. And this is so important because a lot of times I like when Dr. Nieto talked about authentic partnership. And I love partnership. I love this engagement with parents. I love the engagement with the community. Because until we can engage, until we can understand, then there's no way that we can assist. I like it when she talked about maybe, you know, we need to take a walk into the community. And this is something that I teach my students too. When you become a school counselor, I want you to go around and look in your community. Who are the people in my community? Who am I serving? And that's the only way that we can effectively serve. That's the only way. And being authentic, for example, when you are authentic, then you care. And if you care, you will understand that I need to be inviting and welcoming. And what does that mean? I'll break it down in one example. If I'm sending out a letter to parents, perhaps not everybody reads in English. And so I need to care about that. And if I am sending out information via email, perhaps somebody doesn't have a computer or an internet so they can check the email. Or I need to care that the students themselves are not translating things to the parents and their families, because we don't know what go to and that is, putting on a lot of pressure on that one child indeed. So, I am pretty excited about this, and I'm empowered, more empowered to continue this work, and I'm so blessed to hear you speak. But I'm going to stop by saying something I learned the other day, and for the likes of me, I can't remember who said it, so I'm going to repeat it. It says, "Don't be sorry for me, be liberated, and show me your liberation, and then stand with my liberation."
Sounds like Paulo Freire, but I don't
Yeah,
know
all
if he
right.
said it.
All right.
I leave you with that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Last but not least, Mr. Hector Sanchez.
Well, Dr. Nieto took me down memory lane. I had forgotten half of the stuff that she. I was born in Puerto Rico, and I came to New York City 1952, and I think I started speaking more English than Spanish. My mother always spoke to me in Spanish. And though she had, single mother, though she had only a third grade education, and she worked in the factories and get home about 5:30, something like that. She would sit me down every day and I had to show her homework. She couldn't read. I mean, she couldn't read in English and she wouldn't know, but she made me do that every single day. So don't shortchange any of the parents you may have thinking that they don't care. My mother, with third grade education, made sure that I did what I had to do. And the counselor in high school told me, "You're not college material." So I remember that too. And I also remember the one teacher, a sixth grade teacher, who was the first one that ever believed in me, that told me I could do this. You're smart. You can go far. You can. And guess what I became? A sixth grade teacher. So you never know who you're going to impact and how deeply you're going to impact them. But you will impact them. And it took me years to really know my name. Héctor Manuel Sánchez García Sánchez Ortiz Rosado Román, confirmation name John.
Talk about names. My middle name is not Maria, it's Mary. Like yours is John, because you were confirmed here.
Yeah.
So my middle name when I was baptized was Mary, because the Catholic priest, the Irish priest, told my parents, "Well, you're in the United States now, so you have to speak English." And this is the story that I would tell my students when I would ask them to talk about their names, because all these stories about names are implicated in our history and our view of diversity. And I just want to say something about Stephanie, that I'm so glad that you are making sure that your students confront these issues. Because we don't want, and I said it in my presentation, we don't want to create a comfortable space for students. We want to create a safe space for students, and that's very different. So comfortable is where you go back to what you know. Safe is where maybe you're confronted with things that you don't know, but that's the only way to learn.
Thank you, panelists. So, all right. Now, audience, it's your turn. All right. Oh, we got one. Look at that. So we're both going to come around with the mic, and so they're going to turn the mic on for us, correct? And so we'll get started. We're going to come on
Looks
down.
like an auction.
Yeah, right? It was like, oh, okay. So you want to go? We're going to go ahead.
I'm going to take your side because I'm in class, so I can get there faster.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you introduce yourself, please? Tell us who you
Yes.
are.
My name is Emilio Reales, and I am a teacher at Cesar Batalla, Bridgeport. And I'm a student also here, a graduate student. The question that I have is this. According to the panelist's view, I would like to know what is the difference for you guys between language learner and language acquisition? For you guys, what is the difference between those two?
Well, language learner is the person, language acquisition is the process
Process.
of how you learn a language.
So a person that was raised in Puerto Rico come to United States, even though in Puerto Rico we teach English, the person, even though have the skills and have the knowledge, comes in here and is exposed to the language, that's language acquisition, that's not language learning?
Well, you know, we are always learning language and we're always acquiring language. So,
So-
you know, I don't know how, one is the person, one is the process is how I would say it. I don't know if anybody else.
That's the way I would.
Well, maybe, just a comment, yeah.
Yes.
In the field, language learning is exactly what Dr. Nieto said, it's learning a language. Language acquisition is a process, could be neurological, could be socially constructed. In other words, language acquisition is the process of acquiring a language. Language learning is learning a language. And teachers get confused with those, because language learning is usually measured by language production. Language acquisition is a whole, it's a linguistic term.
Thank you for coming. Oh, my name is Hector Huertas. My heart is racing, so forgive me if I don't speak articulately. Like you, I learned, my mommy was from Cuba, my father was from Puerto Rico. I did not learn English until I started watching Sesame Street, right? And I'm 47 years old, so that was back in the day with, you know, Rita Morena, screaming in the Electric Company. This is a very powerful moment for me, listening to our narratives, right? Because our narratives contribute and shape who we are. They shape our identity. They shape our consciousness. My question to you is, I'm a doctoral student now at WestCon, and I'm a teacher at Norwalk High School, teaching English. Well, what we call English. Because while the other teachers are teaching the crucibles, I'm teaching breath, eyes, and memory, Vedantika, you know. So that's part of the canon. My question is, as I go through the culturally responsive or culturally relevant discourse, as I've been reading Geneva Gay, Lansing Billings, Banks, and you guys have touched very beautifully about this idea of humility in part of the CRP discourse. But my question to you is, as I go through these articles in my books, you would think that the concept of care would be a lot more central in the discourse. Yes, we talk about school climate. Yes, we talk about equity. Yes, we talk about access. But for me, as a researcher, as a future researcher, I'm thinking, well, why aren't we having this conversation about what is the function of care and how do we apply care, not into this, oh, no, I'm talking about, I'm listening to you. Who are you? And what can I do to help you, help me, help you? You know what I'm saying? So why is it in the scholarship, I'm sorry, I'm getting, my heart's like coming out, but you know, it's the ancestors coming through me, you know? The ancestors, you know, La Negra's coming out. And when she comes out, she comes out. I don't take any prisoners. But seriously, but why is it in the scholarship I mean, not to say that Geneva Gay doesn't talk about care, she does. Lenton Billing talks about care. She does. Banks talks about, yeah, they all do. You do. Yeah. But I'm wondering, why isn't that more like the spinal of the book? Why isn't the issue of care much more of a focal point in the discourse?
Can I start a response for this one?
Yeah, of course.
Go ahead, Mr. King.
Of course.
When you read these texts, where are you?
Where am I?
Yeah. Home. Are there any children in the room?
No, I'm the children.
When you're taking your courses, are there any children in the room?
No.
Look around you right now. Are there any children in the room? So, ideally, this concept of care mentally is there, right? But there are no children in the room, so we can't practice it. So we don't write it. And we should.
I don't know. I don't agree with that. Because we can care for one another. We don't have to be children. You know, we can care for one another. And, you know, I would say that if you're starting your doctoral process now, there's been a lot written about care and critical care. If you don't know Rosalie Rolón Dow's work, Rosalie Rolón Dow, D-O-W, has written about that. Critical care. And I think that it's, you know, embedded in all that we do. And if we don't make it more central, you know, shame on us. But you know, that's always been a central tenet for me. And I wouldn't even say care, I say love. Mm-hmm. For me, love is that, you know, Pierre said that I'm writing a book with my daughter now, and one of the chapters is about love and about loving students. And, you know, I remember many years ago saying to my husband, who was a middle school and high school teacher, I had this course and I was teaching at UMass, and the session that night had been about love. And, you know, some people were saying, loving students, you know. And I got home and I said, Angel. Well, in Spanish I said, but I said, do you love your students? And he said, how could you not love your students? I mean, that was the first thing he said. Now, he said, now then, when they're all together, but I love them all, because I don't think you can be a teacher without that. And so I think that is central to a lot of people's thinking. And, you know, the more that you get into your doctoral process, that's what you should look for, because I think that you will find it. And it's good to meet a Boricubano here.
Yeah. You also, I also tell my teachers that you need to truly love them, but you can't be a phony about it.
Yeah. Yes.
Because if you're a phony, you don't make any progress whatsoever with that child.
Yeah.
If you're genuine and they truly, truly know that you care about them, they'll climb walls for you.
That's right.
And if I may add something, from a counselor's perspective, one of our existential theorists spoke about, and we know empathy is extremely important in the process of counseling. However, one of our theorists said something that I really liked. He said, you know, it's empathy or care is my heart connecting with your heart. And that's why when we talk about self-awareness, that's why it's so critical. Because if we're not aware of who we are and what we bring to the table, and how what we bring to the table can impact negatively or positively the people that we work with, then that's a big problem, because we have to stop and identify these things and being aware, because if we think that they are less than, and a lot of times that's what's going on in the process. We think that it's them or the other, and then it's me. And that's a big problem. We have to deal with that before we can actually connect and care. So we might have the concept of care, and we might have theories around care. We might mentally be able to think about it, and we know that's important. But until we can assess, do I really care? What do I really think about people who are coming from different immigrants who are coming from other countries, or even minorities who are in my classroom, then
Yeah.
Two ideas come to my mind. First is voice. We don't use that as much as we did before. Voice is so important. When you hear a voice represents a person, a human being, a culture, a past, a present. The other one we use in Portuguese, and I believe in Spanish, cariño. You know, if you have cariño with someone, you care. And those two, I think, are really pedagogical strengths a teacher should have.
You know, I was going to say that it's important to think about what love means, because I'm just sort of throwing it out there, but, you know, people are saying, what does it mean to love your students? So it's not a sentimental thing. It's not a good boy sort of thing. So in this book that I'm writing with my daughter, she has a blog, by the way. If you're interested, it's called maestrateacher.com. And so a lot of her blogs will become part of our book. And she sees love as sort of investing in students, in believing in them, in really supporting and believing in their futures. So that's what love is. It's not a sentimental journey. And so she wrote about how she had told a class one day that, you know, that some were misbehaving. She's an ESL teacher. And one of the kids said, "Do you hate us, Miss Lopez?" And she said, "Hate? How could I ever hate you? If there's a teacher who hates you, that teacher should not be teaching." But I love you. And they said, "Love, Miss Lopez? Really?" She said at the end of that year, she had lots of notes on her board that said, "I love you, Miss Lopez." Because they got to understand what she meant by it, you know. So I think it's something that everybody needs to think about, because if you love someone, you are trying to be on the same level as them. You don't believe that you're superior to them. You know, you really want the best for them. In Italian, I think they say, "Ti voglio bene." I'm not saying it correctly, I don't think, but that means I wish you well, you know. And that's what love should be about.
Hi, so I'm Jane Himmel. I'm not a teacher, but I'm the youth coordinator at the Connecticut Institute for Refugees and Immigrants. So we resettle refugees in Bridgeport and Fairfield, and I have the great honor of working with William. And I just wanted to make a couple comments and then ask a question. First, just that Hope Club he mentioned. Well, a group of the students in that stood up before the ELL Summit at Bridgeport in front of a room full of teachers and told them how that club was what gave them a sense of hope, not more than a sense of hope, but reduced their isolation, a place to belong, and they felt like they'd really come home. And whenever people, I've asked them, "Do you have Mr. King?" and their faces light up. He's truly extraordinary. I also, while I have a sort of a captive audience of teachers or prospective teachers, I wanted to just add, because I have the family's perspective, the barriers with lack of technology is huge. Please don't make assumptions that our kids have internet, that they know what a thumb drive is, that their parents can access an app that, a communication app that the teachers are using, things like that. But also, when you think about culture, please look into the culture of education that the parents come from. Some parents come without any education, but they also may come with no understanding of the homeschool connection. They may not know that the teacher actually expects them to come in, or that they should have an involvement with education, because the arena of school belongs to the teacher for some countries, and at home is just home. So I think that's really important. And at one workshop we had a parent who then came up and said, "Wow, I didn't even know I could go into the school because I don't speak English." And I guess finally my question, so I am not a teacher, and I don't have any educational training per se, but I do get concerned about, especially with the high school kids and the adolescents, about their ability to just express themselves and learn to read and write and express themselves when they already maybe don't come with much of an education and certainly don't have English. And I wonder how subversive I guess it would be if the school, if they're supposed to be reading and writing and really learning English, is to promote things that might let them just read and write, well, there's not really much reading they can do in maybe their native language, but just or if you condone or do in school, okay, write what you want to say in your own language, because at least you're expressing yourself and thinking and using higher order learning and things like that. So I'm just kind of curious what you think if outside of school you have practices that might say it's okay for you to be doing whatever it takes to help you get out your thoughts.
I'm waiting for Mr. King to answer that.
Wow, just so complicated. Learning a language is not learning a subject area. They're two separate domains. Again, if you talk high school, you're talking about children in a different developmental stage than a child that's 8 or 9. Okay, I have to be very short on this one. It's very difficult. The idea is to have success in a child. So it's not just learning English, it's understanding subject areas, it's understanding geography, sociology, science, all these kinds of things. And the only way you can do that, if a child, let's say, comes from Ecuador, is in Spanish. Because if that child wants to apply to Fairfield University, he or she has to know the areas, the SATs, and all the other kinds of things. What we do, I think incorrectly, is after about a year or two, we place children in the all English programs, and many of them fail. Now, I'm not saying that some are successful. Of course, some children who have linguistic ability, some people are linguistically intelligent, will go. They're gone, and they'll do well. But many children do not. So it's a very complicated, but to say just language itself is not the issue. It's culture, cariño, if you will, again, love, and understanding how to teach in a native language.
Hi, Jane. So I hope I can answer your question, but I do allow my students to write in their native language. One example that I can think of just recently, my intermediate ESL students are reading Mouse, and one of my students who I know has some problems with language production, verbally and orally. She asked me if she can answer the quiz question in Spanish. One quiz question. She completed 4 out of 5, but the 5th one she wanted to answer in Spanish. And oftentimes I don't think about why. Because to me, the fact that she's doing it, the fact that she's prideful about the assignment, and the fact that she wants to show me and demonstrate her ability on question number 5 matters, because she's done 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I said, yes, of course, write it in Spanish. Expressive, I am dominant, I am an educator, I'm a student, and I care. If I would have said to the young lady, well, this is English class, I would prefer you do it in English, there may be a piece that I'm missing about her level of respect for herself. So to answer your question, I do have writing assignments where I allow them to express themselves in the language of their choice. I have some students who are learning Spanish, but who speak Arabic, and they're trying to speak Spanish, so I allow them to write Spanish in class. So this kind of freedom, oftentimes teachers don't have, So I can't speak for every teacher, but I try my hardest to ensure that kids are given freedom to express themselves in whatever language they choose. But it is a difficult task.
To me, it's about linguistic flexibility. What we're concerned about is student learning. And if we really want them to learn, we have to respect how they learn. So something that our country is not doing very well right now because bilingual education is really, sort of waning. But that doesn't mean that teachers can't do it. So when teachers say, well, we don't have bilingual education, so or I don't speak Vietnamese, for example. I would always say, well, you don't have to speak Vietnamese. Get somebody, especially if you live in an area with a college or university, get somebody to do it, to translate. Get one of the parents to translate it so that you understand. Because the important thing is for students to learn and for respect, because I think right next to humility has to be respect, and that's respect for the language, for the people who speak it. And so that's one way to show it. Now that doesn't, the principal doesn't need to know, right?
Not at my school.
Yeah. I mean, you can do a lot of things that, a friend of mine says, ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
Permission, yep.
And sometimes you have to do that because it's about good pedagogical practice.
But I encourage you to have the conversation, though.
Yes, of course.
Just cover yourself.
Yeah. But there are things that, that nobody's going to come in and say, oh, you started them in their native language? Yeah, but they're doing it in English now. So anyway. And I would disagree with you. I think you are a teacher. You are a teacher.
She's right there.
Dr. Nieto, I'd just like to, my name is Vaughn Allen, and I just want to thank you, Dr. Nieto, for your scholarship in that presentation. I really got a lot out of it, specifically about how you talked about connecting with students, getting to know their community, getting to know their names, getting to know their background. Right now, I'm a student teacher at Norwalk High School, preparing to be a social studies teacher in the fall of next year. And my question is just basically, I'm looking for suggestions in terms of my lesson planning and curriculum development and thinking about, I really think culturally responsive teaching is important. I don't see a lot of it in terms of the curriculum and the lessons that I've seen from teachers that I've been working with. And I'm just trying to get a sense of suggestions that you can give me going forward.
Right. Well, thank you for the question. I always recommend some resources, so start writing. How many of you get teaching tolerance? Okay, good, a few of you. So I would recommend that everybody subscribe to Teaching Tolerance. It is a magazine, it's a project of the SNL, the Southern Poverty Law Center. But just put, I think it's tolerance.org. If you subscribe to the journal, it's absolutely free. They will send it to any teacher who wants it, to anybody who wants it. They also have wonderful video kits, and they are free to any school that want them. And they are very social studies oriented, so I think they're particularly helpful for you. They have on the civil rights movement, they have on voting, they have on, so many things. I don't have it in front of me right now, but they're really fabulous resources. I would also recommend that you look at the ZIN project, ZINN project. That's a project of the Teaching for Change. So you can go on their website, Teaching for Change. Now, they do charge, but they're fabulous pieces. And so I think that they also have, they have books, they have lots and lots of wonderful materials that are very multicultural, very, very diverse, very equitable, and that fill in the missing pieces of our history. So that's something that you want to do. I would also recommend that you go to Rethinking Schools. How many of you subscribe to Rethinking Schools? All right, these people know. So Rethinking Schools is It's a magazine, but they have lots and lots of wonderful materials that, are really fabulous things that you don't get in the mainstream, and that give you different, broader perspectives on reality, especially the social studies, but not only. I would also say join an organization, a professional organization. If you're a social studies teacher, you can join the National Council for Social Studies. If you can't go to the national conference, go to the local conference. They usually have them. Join the National Association for Multicultural Education. I know that several people here are members. And I don't know if are there still conferences here, like the ones that Bill Howe had for years?
Yeah, we're planning one
good.
soon.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I think that, joining a professional organization is really important, because that way you have a group of colleagues who you can really connect with. For my daughter, it was the National Writing Project. Yeah. A wonderful, wonderful project that if you, and he's the director. So how do they get in touch with you?
Here's that mic's closest to you.
I think it's all tied together, what I'm about to say. We have a National Writing Project site here. We also have Young Adult Literacy Labs, and William King runs Ubuntu Academy with Jessica Baldazan, graduates of our programs, which is a 2-week literacy camp for refugee and immigrant youth. My question is, we have scholarships for 15 teachers to do our summer institute, and for the first time, all of us nationally are not getting applicants for our free summer institute that gives you college credit. And I'm thinking, why is this happening? And we're talking about this nationally.
Mm-hmm.
And the question that was just asked a little bit ago, I think, actually could be let on a little bit further, because what do we do with assessment, right? If we want to be culturally responsible, our school systems are making us culturally irresponsible because we're testing our kids to death.
Yeah.
And the more multicultural your setting is, the more the district tests the kids. So the kids are getting tested on the test before they get the test, so we know what their test scores are going to be, so we can test them again, right? It does not work. It's ludicrous, and it's what all the educators in this room right now are facing. Mm-hmm. So I know too, this is Connecticut, there's 2 Connecticut's, you go into other schools and there's no tests because they let kids be kids, and they're teaching kids to question, and they're teaching kids to think critically, and they're teaching kids multiculturalism, although the kids all look exactly the same in those schools. It makes no sense because our communities are not mixed.
Right.
So I guess question number 1 is, what do we do with this assessment bugaboo? But also, what do we do with the zip code apartheid that exists in this state? Thank you.
Wow. Well, I just want to say a little bit about the National Writing Project, and then I'll let other people answer that. Because for my daughter, it made the difference for her. When she moved from New York to Massachusetts, one of her colleagues at the middle school where she teaches, she had been teaching for 10 years by then, and she's been teaching 23 years now. And so one of her colleagues said, Alicia, why don't you join the National Writing Project Summer Institute? They actually pay you. They used to pay. They don't pay anymore, but you get credit. And so she did it, and it changed her life. And she said she was getting a little in a rut after teaching for 10 years. She was a French teacher. And so she was getting a little bit in a rut. And here at this new school, she was a Spanish teacher. Now she's an ESL teacher, as I said. But she got so excited with that summer institute. She created a curriculum, and she knew she would try it out in the fall. And then she joined the National Writing Project, the Western Mass Writing Project. And so she has been a facilitator of the Summer Institute for like 10 years now. And I think this coming summer is the first time she won't be doing it in all these years. But every time she does it, she's so excited about it because the teachers love it, because it's a project, and that's why I really encourage you all to think about it, that respects teachers' knowledge and intellectual abilities. It's teachers teaching teachers, and it is, just full of respect and excitement in the field.
Mr. King, can you talk a little bit about the Summer Institute here and how teachers and kids work together?
That's a wonderful model. Yeah.
We have the Ubuntu Academy, which is, can everybody say this with me? Ubuntu?
Ubuntu.
One more time, Ubuntu.
Ubuntu.
I can be me based on who we are together. That's the philosophy. And in this cohort, we have students coming from Bassick High School. In the past, we've had students coming from Central High School and also Harding High School. And we read, we write, and we practice speaking English. And we also collaborate with the teachers coming from the different areas in the district who are working at Little Labs, who are working at Project Citizen, who are working at Novel Writers, all different writing academies, all different writers' workshops. And the work that's produced has a tendency to make teachers aware of the differences between culture and the difference between social interests and the difference between economic disadvantages. And that comes through the book that we produce, which is called POW. One thing that I've noticed and sort of appreciate about the Ubuntu Academy is that going back into the following year, the students that I work with are more in tune with themselves and also better at accessing the curriculum at Bassick High School. They ask their teachers more questions. They demand more work. They stay after school. And they mentor other young refugee and immigrant youth that are coming up in 9th grade. This year, Ms. Baldasson and I, Jessica Baldasson, who's sitting right there, we continued our second year of what is called the Hope Club. And it's a continuum of just immersion, 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 but also celebration, celebration, celebration of who we are. And as a result of that, we have like a year-long school, pretty much. In the summertime, we meet as writing camp. During the school year, we collaborate with the Hope Club. And now, we are also building with SERI, which is the resettling community that Jane works for, who is also taking many of our students who are at the high school level. So now we created a school within a school. And I think in terms of zip code apartheid, it's the best way to challenge that. Because now our students are really understanding what the purpose of education is, and they feel comfortable interacting with kids from Darien, kids from Southport, kids from Norwalk. And those kids see the progress and they see the joy of learning.
Just one comment in terms of my own experiences. We had a program when I was at Hunter College many moons ago called Triple T program of the Street Academies. And they were really, really successful. We worked in El Barrio and in Harlem. And it was interesting that we created an environment, a safe environment intellectually. The Board of Ed, New York City, the New York Times found out about us. 3 years later, it was gone. Mm-hmm. What I see today, and enlightening in terms of the discussion, is the assessment, and I don't know what happened to my generation. My generation, or our generation, if you will, created, no, I won't say created, educated for freedom, open classrooms, self-awareness. Something happened, I don't understand what happened. Something happened along the way that the assessment bureaucrats took over, and now we're, as you know, with teachers, you're teaching for the test.
Politicians took over.
And
Reagan took over.
And I think that's terrible. I was a 4th grade teacher and a junior high school teacher for several years. I still remember doing my plan book, giving it to my principal on a Friday, close the door, do your own thing. It was fantastic. We could do all sorts of things. You can't do that today. I know you can't. So I don't have an answer. These are more feelings than seeing the state of the art of education today. For me, it's frightening where we're testing for the test. okay? And we're labeling to like No Child Left Behind. It sounds great, but that's a label. It assumed that children of color, children of different languages were left behind. I'm not saying that children are capable of doing good work. Again, these are feelings.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm a second-year science teacher in Bridgeport. All of my students, most or all of my students are economically disadvantaged. And something I've been noticing this year is teaching 7th and 8th grade, you start to see some of your students lose hope and start to lose faith in themselves and faith in their future, which is understandable given the situation and feeling unsafe in their own community and everything they face. So my question to you is is recommendations of how a teacher could help those students regain their faith, regain their self-worth, self-confidence, and intrinsic motivation, especially if you don't have a shared experience.
Can I respond to that first? Again, I truly do believe that not only the counselor in the school can be a counselor to a student. And so I'll respond by saying to teachers that teachers can be a counselor to a student. And what am I saying to you? I'm saying to you that even though you don't have that same experience, you can listen to those experiences, those lived experiences. You can hear those things. You don't have to say anything to the student. You don't have to think about any elaborate responses. You don't have to pity the student. You don't, just by listening and also, just, again, you talk about motivation, just listening, hearing what they have to say, inspiring them to reach for, be a model, is what I'm trying to say. You have gone to college and you've gotten a degree. You can share your own experiences too. It might not be the same, but you can be a model, you can be a mentor, you can show or exhibit that care that we're talking about and that love for the student, and explaining that to them, that you can maybe connect with community organizations in the community, because there are non-for-profit organizations that offer assistance to school. It's just to find out who they are and what do they do. How can I connect with them to access some of the resources that they might have to offer in terms of, okay, maybe they can come in at some point to mentor these students, or maybe there are after school programs that they can offer, or work with you or partner with you to offer, maybe at the school, or however, I don't know the policies that go with that at each school, but you can figure that out. And if you do have some sort of a counselor in the school too, you could partner with that counselor to maybe have it on a larger scale, because maybe not just your own students, but then others who might be struggling with the same situation.
I always think about a teacher who I worked with who's in several of my books. Her name is Mary Ginley. She was a wonderful teacher for 42 years and finally retired. But she's written about different anecdotes that she experienced with her students. And I remember one when she was teaching. She left, she retired from Massachusetts and then taught in Florida for a few years. And she said she had a student who came in early, because students would sometimes come in early to do their homework, and she welcomed them and so on to do that. And this young woman came in and seemed very distraught. And so Mary said, "What's going on?" And she started telling her about a friend of her sister's who had committed suicide, and that now her sister was saying that she wanted to kill herself, and that their mother had said, well, if that's what you want to do, go do it, or, something. And the child was distraught, and Mary was listening. I mean, that's the best advice. Listen and ask sometimes. And Mary said, "Honey, it sounds like you're you're really sad and maybe you need to speak to someone. And the girl said, what do you think I'm doing? So, wow. You know? So, just listen to them, talk to them. Even if your curriculum is rigid and you can't do much about it, you can do something. You can work around the edges. You can push the envelope. One of the teachers who I interviewed for one of my books said she had a 10-minute period at the end of every day called Hanging Out with Miss Bettis time, where they just hung out and they talked to one another. They got to know one another. That class was in Texas. 99% of the kids were on free and reduced lunch, were English, were learning English. Spanish was their first language. And most were economically disadvantaged. They did so well on their test, because it was all about the test, that first year that she was a teacher, that people couldn't believe it because they thought, she's a newbie, what does she know? And I think it was that 10 minutes, I'm not saying it's a panacea, but it made such a difference. And those kids, a lot of those kids said at the end of the year that they wanted to become teachers, like you. Yeah. So I think you don't know the power that you have as teachers. You just don't know. And it's very depressing sometimes. It's very, you just feel like it's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Know that you are making a difference. Mm-hmm. There's nobody like teachers. Mm-hmm.
And
counselors, nurses, those are the helping professions.
My first year as a bilingual teacher, I had 42 kids. Oh my God. From non-readers to high school readers. And I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, 42 kids. I mean, everywhere you look, I didn't even have enough seats. But going back to the caring part, they knew that I cared. Mm-hmm. We went out of our way. We created dances. This was the time of Saturday Night Live, and we choreographed songs. We went through the district performing. We built that bond, and that bond is real. I know of 5 students from those 42 that became teachers because of moi. But you're listening, you're communicating, you have to establish those relationships. You have to establish those relationships. But listening is critical.
Hi, my name is Kristen Mendoza. I came from New Haven today, from New Haven Public Schools. I teach at Wilbercross High School, another ESL person. Thank you, Dr. Nieto. When I was a new teacher, someone gave me a copy of What Keeps Teachers Going when I was not sure if I would keep going, and that was 12 years ago.
All right,
and I went to try to find my copy to come here today and bring it, and I had given it to another new teacher, so passing it on. I was hoping, and I'm sure that Dr. Nieto would also have something to say about this, but I was hoping that Dr. Morrison could actually talk a little bit about what they mentioned about best practices for undocumented students. We work with CT Students for a Dream at our school, wonderful organization for people to tap into. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about those students and their families.
Okay. So, and this is an extremely important topic because of what's going on nowadays and understanding that our students might be in the school who are fearful and don't know who to turn to, who to talk to, who to share their fears with. But one of the things, and of course, you can't ask them, whether or not they're undocumented or not. But one of the big things for me is creating in the school environment a safe place, that we're creating a welcoming place and an open place where we're able to connect with these students and building relationships with these students. And for me, that's a big thing. A lot of times we don't know exactly how to help them, but of course, first we have to know that they are entitled to free public education and that they deserve to be in the classroom and that they deserve to learn and that we put out the effort to help them to learn. Also to connect with families as well, if you're aware, to connect with the families to understand, of course, what's going on, what kind of services they need, what kind of resources. I know in Connecticut, Governor Malloy has some, if you check the website, they have some resources that the school can use. For example, knowing their rights as families, and of course, putting plans in place just in case, ICE happens. Who would they leave their children with, etc. Kind of a, will kind of thing. And so teachers and school can find out this information. Also that schools know that a lot of times, of course, that they can't come on the school compound. They're not supposed to, and that's illegal. Right, so I know I got that right. And a lot of times the schools don't know that that's the case, or they're not sure what to do. And so just understanding who they are, what kind of resources they need would be important. Building relationships, providing from a school counselor's perspective, providing a safe place. And teachers, again, can be counselors to listen, build relationship with them so that they can feel safe. So in a nutshell. But you can download the article, you can download it online to read some more.
And Stephanie was just talking,
Yeah.
it reminded me of after Trump became president and he was claiming that the ICE was going to come and round up.
Right.
I had this second grader who all of a sudden started to cry.
Yeah, it's devastating.
And he would cry every day. So finally, I go to him and I say, why? I'm crying, in Spanish, of course. Estoy llorando porque no sé si mi papá y mamá van a estar en la casa when I come back. They didn't know if their mother or father was going to be there when they got out of school. So he didn't want to come to school or stay in school. So it does impact them all ages. I was surprised of a second grader, but.
So emotionally, we have to care about that because a lot of times we think so much of academics that we're not thinking about the psychological impact of what can happen, go on with these students, the fear for themselves, but more so for their parents that they may never see again. And so we have to be concerned about that. In the article, I talk about socio-emotional help and strategies, also academic strategies and college career access, which is an important piece too, because sometimes they don't think that they can go to college. And here they are, a lot of them might be working very hard, A students, etc. But sometimes students don't think that they can go to college. Again, psychologically, what's going on in their heads. Maybe their parents told them, you can't share this at school. They don't want them to talk about it. And so they might keep that to themselves and that fear. So again, the biggest thing that I'll say to you to take away is to have that open space, building relationships, and listening to your students so that you can be advocates for them.
I know that we've run out of time, but I just want to add a little something. How many of you are administrators here? Okay, so this is directed at you, but also at teachers who are here and others who interact with administrators. The tone set by administrators is so important. We've been talking about primarily teachers and counselors who don't have the power that administrators do. And so just as an example, in my town, after Trump was elected, the superintendent, along with the principals, came up with a beautiful statement for all families and for all the kids about how you are safe in our school, we are here for you, and so just beautiful. And then the principal of the high school went to every ESL class to talk to the students and tell them that they were important, that we are taking care of you. That's huge. So if you're a teacher in a school with a lot of immigrant students, or any students who need the extra help, you know, you have to say this has to be policy and it has to be practice, and it has to be done from the top down.
Good evening. My name is Numa Chowdhury, and I'm actually a junior at Fairchild Wheeler, which is an interdistrict high school in Bridgeport.
All right.
And the reason that I'm here with my peers is because the group of us, there's one more who's not here, unfortunately, we're working on instilling a program that generally betters the well-being of the students at our school, because the students at our school do well academically. Like, academically, we're pretty okay there, but I've noticed that mentally a lot of us are suffering, and it's painful as a student to not be able to help my peers, and like the only thing I can offer them is a shoulder, and like that's it. And so well-being is a lot more than just mental health, and it comes into this, which is why we're here. And so the question that I had for you guys is, what do you think that in terms of like the discrepancies and what's being practiced and taught in schools, how is that affecting students out of school, and like what are the negative and lasting implications?
You know, it makes a big difference if you're invisible. That is a huge thing. Because if you think you're invisible, then you're not important. If you think that, you know, nothing that your people ever did was in any of the books that you're reading, then your people never did anything. So, you know, I always say, go back to the curriculum. Look at the curriculum. Ask your teachers, how can you make the curriculum more inclusive? And say, we can help. We can help because we have the experience, you know? So, and, you know, you have resources here at the university. You can say, what are the kinds of materials that our teachers need to make the work that we're studying more relevant to us? That doesn't mean like, you know, I actually taught in a Puerto Rican Studies department at Brooklyn College. I was an ethnic studies professor. And I think ethnic studies are really, really important. But that doesn't mean that I think that Puerto Rican kids just need to know Puerto Rican studies. They need to know all studies, all studies. So, but you don't have that right now in most schools. What you have is European American studies, history, language, culture, for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. And so I would say, you have a little group, go see your principal. Go to school committees, school boards.
We discussed this with our administrators, which is why we were allowed to come to the and get permission from our administrators and our principals. So we have to go to from our, you know, administrative people and our authoritative figures. But the thing with our schools, the cohesion between the teachers and the students is there. Like, there's not that connection. I'm lucky to have teachers that I'm close to, but I know some students who really just don't feel it. Like, they come to school and it's like a punishment, which it should be, because you're there for a large part of your life.
Yeah. Do you have a club for students?
We have a couple, but they're not really like put out there. Like, we do have resources at school, but they're not taught about. Like, the only reason I found out about them is because I went forward and asked my counselor, like, what is there for me?
Right. So you're a go-getter. You have to inspire other kids to be go-getters, you know? And you might want to, don't take it all on yourselves, because that's a big burden, but you might want to recommend other clubs.
Recruit.
Yes, recruit
Yes.
and delegate.
All right, so looking at the time, I wanted to ask if our panelists wanted to make any closing remarks. Anyone? Any final comments?
Closing remarks.
I want to thank everyone for coming and listening and participating. This has truly been an honor for me. But respectfully, you are the reason why I'm here. So I just wanted to thank you.
Again, ditto. Thank you very much. What can I say? I love everybody. I love you. I love teaching. I love the field. And I just hope that our students will be happy in the classroom. That's the most important thing.
I'm also very honored to be here. Indeed, working with children, is really my passion. And sometimes I tell my school counseling students that I vicariously live through them because it's such a joy to reach out to students. And I hope that, I know we don't have a lot of school counselors in the elementary school, which is a shame. And I wish that every school will have a school counselor, because truly, I don't know if everybody knows what school counselors do. Yeah. But really, some of the things that she's talking about, that's one of the school counselor's role, to identify some of these things and being able to collaborate with others in the school system. The school counselors really do have power, and the teachers do have power, and a lot of times the teachers and school counselors don't know that they have power. And my hope is that they will know that, they will learn how to advocate for themselves, advocate for the profession, but more so to advocate for the students and the welfare of the students that they take care of every day. So thank you again for coming, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for coming, but this is a direct result of our partnership, a truly two-way partnership with Fairfield University that began about 5 years ago?
Yeah, about
5 years ago. And every year we just keep enhancing it to the point where 3 years ago we actually the professors started giving classes at Cesar Batalla. And then the kids, in the service learning, then the kids would go out into the classrooms and mingle. Then we also got tutors from there. The literacy course is taught there. And they get to actually do, and the professors win too.
We do.
They win too, because they're right in the field and they're getting the exposure and the experience back and forth. And what issues are they really? So thank you all. And thank you for taking me down memory lane.
So I think that, for me, these activities are always, they fill my soul because they give me hope. So you as teachers give me hope, and the young people, you really give me hope. So thank you.
Can I use this? We've been speaking for 2.5 hours about teachers and students. So I'm going to ask you for, it's not a favor. As you know, we've been having school mass shootings. So I'm going to ask you for a moment of silence for the teachers who lost their lives, as well as the students, if you don't mind, as we are adjourning. Thank you. Let me remind you that this is an ongoing diversity lecture series. So we're going to have another one next year on this time. So please stay tuned. And again, thank you so much for coming. And it was really a pleasure having you here.